An open prairie surrounds a cluster of trees in the distance. A man raises a telescope to his eye. The telescope eyepiece frames a group of Native Americans with horses. An American flag flutters against a blue sky. A bell rings in the background. The walls of an adobe structure are revealed. Below, in a courtyard, Native Americans talk and gesture with Anglo-Americans dressed in Western period clothes.
It was a lone outpost of Anglo-American civilization on the southwestern edge of the United States. A living symbol of the nation's yearning to move westward, poised to change the American West forever. Bent's Fort was the largest trading post for hundreds of miles. It was a crossroads of culture for the Indians of the plains, the trappers of the mountains, and the traders of the Southwest.
At dusk, an American flag flies over Bent's old fort.
Yet in August of 1849, this guiding light of Western expansion burned out. What happened to Bent's Fort? The fur trading empire that helped fuel the flow of commerce on the Santa Fe Trail. What happened to the traders and travelers for whom the fort was a haven in a barren country and a mecca of international trade? And what kind of legacy did they leave behind for the American West and the nation?
With a blue wagon in the foreground, an American flag stands raised above the fort. The title Traders, Tribes, and Travelers, the story of Bent's old fort, fades in.
Today's map puts Bent's old fort off the beaten path, nestled along the north bank of the Arkansas River in what is now southeastern Colorado. But in the 1830s and 40s, its location is far more auspicious. As the Arkansas meanders through the prairie, it also serves as an international border between the United States and Mexico.
What more invigorating, enlivening pleasure is there than traversing the grand prairies, admiring the beauties of unkept wild and lovely nature, and chasing the fleet-footed buffalo? Louis Girard, visitor to Bent's Fort.
A color illustration fades in, revealing the city of St. Louis in the early 1800s.
William Bent and his older brother Charles are also drawn to the untamed expanse, despite their metropolitan roots. Raised in St. Louis, they choose the rugged life of fur trading while still in their teens. When they make friends with Ceran St. Vrain, a partnership forms that will change the West. In the first decades of the 1800s, the fur trade drives many adventurers and entrepreneurs west. Fur is at the height of fashion, especially beaver felt hats, and trappers find the western rivers rich with pelts. But by the late 1830s, beaver is increasingly hard to find and is being replaced by other furs and silk. Traders gradually shift their sights to an animal of the plains, the buffalo. The prairie is home to a seemingly endless supply. Robes made from buffalo hide sell as quickly as the tribes of the southern plains can hunt and dress them. The Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, and Kiowa barter freely with traders, sharing the bounty. By the early 1830s, business is so good that St. Vrain and the Bents realize they need a headquarters, a hub from which to ferry goods along the bustling Santa Fe Trail, the 800-mile trade route that links Missouri with Santa Fe, New Mexico. Construction begins at a site on the Arkansas River, the border with Mexico, near the Indian camps and buffalo herds, and in view of the Rocky Mountains.
Charles Bent knew the comfort of the Mexican adobe houses, and when the fort was being planned, he determined it should be built of adobe. So a large body of Mexican adobe masons was brought up from Taos to make and lay the adobe bricks. George Bent, son of William Bent and Owl Woman.
William Bent supervises construction of the fort and becomes its primary caretaker. Originally known as Fort William, it will be the largest structure of its time between the state of Missouri and the Pacific Ocean, and the first permanent American settlement in all the southern plains. Bent's Fort will also be the stage on which an international drama would unfold.
The title 1833, The Night the Stars Fell, fades in.
In November of 1833, one of the grandest meteor showers on record lights up the night sky, perhaps a promising sign of things to come for the fort and the newly formed Bent St. Vrain Company. The Cheyenne camped nearby read the silent arrows of light differently. To them, they foretell a fiery death from the heavens, and some men prepare for battle. At dawn the next day, there is a collective sigh of relief, and stories of the night the stars fell pass into Cheyenne folklore. William Bent grows ever closer to the Cheyenne people, cementing his trading ties with marriage and a family.
About 1835, he married my mother, Owl Woman, daughter of White Thunder, the keeper of the arrows, and thus became a member of the Cheyenne tribe. George Bent.
By the 1840s, Bent St. Vrain and Company is one of America's most successful businesses, famous for its fair and peaceful trade with the Indians.
The Cheyenne village was located for the fall and winter of 1844 to surround and kill buffalo and make dress robes for the trade of the fort at the request of William Bent. We had a successful trade that winter as buffalo was very plenty and fat. William Boggs, visitor to Bent's Fort.
The American traders, Indian buffalo hunters, and Mexican merchants all prosper, but there are some troubling signs of things to come. As the tribes become more dependent on the buffalo robe trade, their way of life changes. They come to highly value certain manufactured trade goods, including alcohol. The Bent St. Vrain Empire reaches around the globe. Goods from the cosmopolitan cities of Europe and the exotic markets of the Orient are traded at the fort for buffalo robes and other products of the prairie.
Very good, sir.
The robes are valued as blankets, bedding, and belting for factory machinery, and marketed throughout the U.S., Europe, and Asia.
Two men carry a package of pressed furs across the courtyard.
For now, the travelers of the day find Bent's Fort more than a trading post. It is a source of comfort in a harsh and lonely land.
The solitary stranger passing this lone fort feels proudly secure when he comes within sight of the stars and stripes which float above the walls. George F. Ruxton, traveler and explorer.
A Mexican man plays two traditional flutes simultaneously.
Traveler Susan McGuffin is 18 years old and expecting her first child when she reaches the fort.
It fills my idea of an ancient castle. It is built of adobes, unburnt brick, and Mexican style so far. The walls are very high and very thick with rounding corners. Susan Shelby McGuffin, visitor to Bent's Fort.
As Susan arrives at the fort, Lieutenant James W. Hebert of the United States Topographical Engineers is recovering from an illness.
I was taken ill to such a degree that it was necessary to carry me in a wagon until we arrived at Bent's Fort. Lieutenant James W. Hebert.
Hebert eventually improves enough to explore the structure and its surroundings in the company of fort resident Dr. Edward Hempstead.
I spent this morning employed in taking the dimensions of Bent's Fort. It required some time to complete all the measurements. The structure is quite complex. They may, however, be useful in giving one an idea of the forts that can be built in that country. Lieutenant Hebert.
Hebert's measurements will prove even more useful many years later in ways he cannot have imagined. But at the time, he is caught up in the daily spectacle of life at the fort.
A blacksmith pumps a bellows, stoking the fire in his shop, while a man sits on a bench writing as others pass by in the courtyard.
Bent's Fort is its own unique world, a crossroads of culture and a Tower of Babel. At least 7 languages are spoken there: English, French, Spanish, Sioux, Cheyenne, Ute, and Comanche.
The majority of hands at the fort are Mexican and Spanish the prevailing language, but with English, French, and Indian additions and combinations, there is no slight confusion of tongues. Captain Philip St. George Cook, 1st Dragoons, U.S. Army of the West.
The visitors are just as diverse.
In the fort was a melange of traders and employers, government officers and subordinates, Indians, Frenchmen, and hunters. Louis Girard, visitor to Bent's Fort.
Some of the early trade is with fur trappers, the so-called mountain men. But by 1846, the favored currency is buffalo robes. Much of the trading goes on in the Indian camps, but the tribes also come to the fort to trade, often bartering in sign language. After the trading is complete, the hides are compacted on the fort's fur press into packages sized for shipping. Spanish is spoken when the wagons arrive from Mexico, loaded with striped Navajo blankets and silver coins. The full complement of permanent residents at the fort is about 60, but numbers can swell to 200. The list of employees and visitors reads like a who's who of the Old West. Among them are Kit Carson and Jim Beckworth.
A boy runs while rolling a metal hoop through the courtyard with a stick.
For the children, there is always something to do or see. For adults, tired from hard work and hard travel, the fort offers the opportunity for rest and relaxation, and the rare chance to have fun. All are welcome at the Fort Fandangos, where Charlotte, Bent family slave and fort cook, is a popular dance partner.
All, irrespective of rank, age, and color, went pell-mell into the excitement in a manner that would have rendered a leveler of aristocracies and select companies frantic with delight. It was a most complete democratic demonstration. Louis Girard.
But some visitors find the amusements at the fort a little too wild, even for the West.
Who could have supposed such a thing? They have a regularly established billiard room. And I hear the cackling of chickens at such a rate sometimes, I shall not be surprised to hear of a cockpit. Susan Shelby McCoffin.
Fort resident Dr. Edward L. Hempstead also favors quieter pursuits, often keeping to his library. But little can console Susan McGuffin when she miscarries her child.
In a few short months, I should have been a happy mother and made the heart of a father glad. But the ruling hand of a mighty providence has interposed and deprived us of the hope. Susan Shelby McCoffin.
The title 1846, The Army of the West, fades in.
1846 is a fateful year for many, and the most pivotal in the life of Bent's Fort.
Fire!
Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny leads a 1,700-man contingent known as the Army of the West from Fort Leavenworth across the plains to fight the war with Mexico. His army uses the fort as a hospital, supply depot, and staging area.
Throughout the land there is a cry, and folks all know the reason why. Shot Mexico's two-legged fires and tagging Uncle Sammy stuff.
While readying his dragoons, Colonel Kearny issues a proclamation stating his intent to invade Mexico.
For the purpose of seeking union with and ameliorating the conditions of its inhabitants, all who take up arms or encourage resistance against the government of the United States will be regarded as enemies and will be treated accordingly. Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny, United States Army of the West.
March away, then march away, then march away, bold sons of freedom, you're the boys can steal and bleed on.
On August 2nd, Kearny leads his army from the Bent's Fort encampment into Mexican territory to carry out his proclamation. By the end of August, the Army of the West appears to have won over New Mexico without firing a shot. Diplomacy, propaganda, and military might make way for a peaceful transfer of power. Kearny, now promoted to general, moves on to aid in the taking of California, but not before appointing Charles Bent as governor of the New Mexico Territory. As Mexico succumbs to America's westward expansion, William Bent's Cheyenne friend, Yellow Wolf, fears his people will soon suffer a similar fate.
He says that the buffalo are diminishing so rapidly that before long, his people will have to starve or else settle down and live like the whites. Lieutenant James W. Hebert.
Meanwhile, in Taos, former Mexican territory, Pueblo Indian and Mexican resentment over American rule reaches a fever pitch, resulting in an uprising and the brutal assassination of Governor Charles Bent in January 1847. Other Americans and suspected American sympathizers are also killed in the revolt. Saron St. Vrain raises a group of volunteers to help the U.S. Army put down the revolt and avenge Charles's death. Times remain turbulent, though. Later that year, Saron offers to sell the fort to the U.S. government. They are considering building forts along the Santa Fe Trail to protect the Army and civilians against Indian attacks. It is a difficult time for William Bent. He has already lost his brother Charles. His wife, Owl Woman, and his brother George also die in 1847. Soon after, William Bent and Saron St. Vrain dissolved their partnership, leaving the fort entirely to Bent. Purportedly, the government makes an offer to buy the fort, which William soundly rejects as too low. In 1849, a cholera outbreak ravages the plains, killing perhaps half the Southern Cheyenne. William Bent knows that life at the fort will never be the same.
At dawn, birds fly next to the fort's massive front wall. Several of the birds rest on a ladder, which leans against the adobe wall.
Some believe William is so concerned that his fort will be taken over by the Army now fighting the Indians that he is driven to desperate measures. Others claim that Bent merely abandons the fort and fumigates it with burning tar against the cholera epidemic. Still others say he burns the fort to prevent Indians or other traders from using it, and there are even rumors that the Indians themselves burn it. The truth remains a mystery.
The title, 1849 to the Present, From Ruins to Reconstruction, fades in.
The fort's days as a trading post are over. Its sun-dried adobe bricks later become a stage stop. In time, the ruins are nothing more than a lonely landmark on the old Santa Fe Trail. Bent goes on to build another fort, and he tries to promote peace between the Indians and the U.S. government. But eventually, William Bent's Cheyenne friends and relatives are relocated to a reservation in what is now Oklahoma. Other tribes endure similar fates. In 1869, William Bent loses his own final battle. He dies of pneumonia, a respected man who, together with his brothers and the St. Vrains, helped shape the history of the West. But if life as he knew it is gone, some are not willing to forget. Recognizing the importance of the post, the Daughters of the American Revolution acquire the property in 1926 and build a commemorative gateway arch. In 1954, the State Historical Society of Colorado obtains the site and excavations begin. 6 years later, Bent's Old Fort National Historic Site becomes part of the National Park System. There is talk of rebuilding the fort, but how can they restore a building no longer there? A building that no one alive has ever seen? The answer comes from Lieutenant Hebert and his meticulous documentation of the fort in the summer of 1846. The first adobe brick of the reconstruction is laid in 1975, and the restoration is completed in 1976. That summer, the National Park Service and the state of Colorado dedicate the new Bent's Old Fort. Like a phoenix from its ashes, the fort rises again from the ruins. Today, visitors can walk the rooms and ramparts as William Bent once did in the company of his family and friends. They can travel back in time to a day when the Plains tribes and buffalo thrived and international trade united Indian nations, the United States, and Mexico. As you walk in the footsteps of those who were here long ago, let modern times fade away and imagine yourself here in the old Southwest, maybe as a Cheyenne, a trapper, a dragoon, or a traveler.
Travel well, sir.
And when you leave, take with you the stories of this crossroads of culture, of the people who lived here in the past, whose lives still resonate with us today, so they will live on into the future of this land we now call the American West.
Home, home, sweet, sweet home. Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. A charm from the sky seems to hallow us there, which seeks through